Welcome to Clockworks, a Legion podcast. I'm Paula Moffat.
I'm Jan Moffat.
And this week we're podcasting like we've never podcast before. About Maniac, the Netflix show. Dunna.
Good job. That's just perfect.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because it's called Maniac.
It's called Maniac. So we are talking about the 2018 show that has just aired on Netflix. As Netflix does, it dropped all the episodes at once. I believe they're calling it a limited series. So I think maybe like either this is going to be like an anthology series or this is it. It's like a mini-series.
Okay.
Anyway, it's called Maniac. It stars Emma Stone and what's his name?
Jonah Hill.
Jonah Hill. And we watched it, and I mean, we tweeted about this immediately that, like, we're getting some Legion vibes from it. And so we wanted to, like, have a little discussion, talk about it a bit for those of you who are Legion fans who have seen this show.
Yeah, I mean, so what we'll do is we'll start by talking non-spoilery about why we're talking about Maniac on our Legion podcast. And then we'll give you a warning and move into discussing it fully spoiled. So if you haven't seen it, hopefully this will be like enticing, or maybe you'll listen to us talk and say, no, I don't feel like ever watching this. But How did this show remind you of Legion, Jan?
Well, even in like my experience of watching it, the first time I watched Legion, I just had no idea what to expect. And it was the same with this. It like, Netflix recommended it, and you just pressed play. Yep. So we watched it having zero idea what it was going to be about.
Maybe even less than I did with Legion, because I knew that that it was a X-Men universe.
Yeah. So right off the bat, it reminded me it was a bit surreal. The filmmaking style was off-putting, and the protagonist was mentally ill.
Yep.
Is mentally ill. And so those things hooked me right off the bat, and and he's talking to someone who isn't there, or he seems to be talking to someone who isn't there.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it made me immediately want to watch the whole series.
It's like Legion, it's surreal in the technical sense, right? Mm-hmm. Not just in the sense of, whoa, that's really weird, but in the like, it's using the psychedelic, but also like 30s and 40s surrealism, like showing us juxtaposing images that don't necessarily have a logical connection between them, and you intuit a connection and read meaning into it, and, logical leaps that aren't really explained, and that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. There's quite a bit of that. And then in the visual style too, like images just next to each other, or things that don't really make sense. And we could, without spoiling, we could say that there's kind of levels of reality throughout the show. But even on the most real level of reality, like, again, it's not a spoiler to say Jonah Hill's character, Owen, is schizophrenic. Like, that's in the description of the show. Yeah. So he's seeing things that aren't real, and so the camera's showing us things that aren't real. We're in his point of view a lot, and we are also, he has kind of daydreams and fantasies and mental illness, and also it's a weird and unfamiliar world, and it's hard to keep track of what are we seeing that's weird because this world is real weird, what are we seeing that he's daydreaming but lucid, and what are we seeing that he's mentally ill and doesn't know what's real. Mm-hmm. It's that same kind of alienating sense as a viewer of like, what am I seeing here, right?
Yes, absolutely. And then there's also, on top of that is very reminiscent of Legion, is this isn't a time period that you can put your finger on. No. It's got technology from the 80s. It's very 80s in its technology, but it's as if the 80s technology is transposed on the future, or on like this dystopian gig economy world.
In a lot of ways, the aesthetic is reminiscent of like those 80s cyberpunk movies, like The Fifth Element and Blade Runner and those kind of things. I think that's for deliberate,
definitely on
right?
purpose. Well, Owen's apartment, I swear, is exactly from The Fifth Element. I forgot to go and double check before we recorded this, but the neon signs outside the window and the like really closed, cramped quarters, it's basically all one tiny room, is very reminiscent of Fifth Element.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And like, there's also just a lot of the element, like you said, futuristic technology. It's taking gig economy is a big thing in the outermost world. So it's taking like technological anxieties of 2018. It's not redoing all the same things from those 80s dystopian cyberpunk movies.
No.
But it's reproducing a lot of the aesthetic of them, especially in the outermost reality. And just like Legion, like when exactly is it set?
Yeah, oh, absolutely.
Is it the
yeah,
future? Is
not.
It the past? Is it an alternate world? We're not telling you.
Absolutely.
It doesn't really seem plausible that it's the future of our current reality.
No, I feel like it's a future in which the technology of the 80s is what stayed the same.
Yeah, it's like an alternate present.
Yeah.
Most likely. Anything else we want to say about here in the unspoilery? Like if someone's wondering whether they want to watch it.
Yeah, why would you want to watch this? If you're a fan of Legion, if you're a fan of TV, what makes you want to watch this?
I think that just like Legion, if you're a fan of Legion, don't mind being unsettled by a show. You don't mind being uncertain about what is happening. You enjoy the kind of mental exercise of uncoding and discovering what is happening. And there's a lot of that. And there's a lot of opportunity to do that in Maniac. There's some central kind of themes in common, like what's the nature of reality and how do we understand the world we live in, and mental illness as a theme. So some ideas in common. How do you think, maybe before maybe here in the unspoilery thing too, how do you think all the actors are doing?
I cannot believe this is Jonah Hill. Because what I'm familiar with Jonah Hill is from, like, gross out, stoner, teen garbage movies that I do not like, to be honest. And, like, very much like a comedian. Like, I've never seen him in a serious role. And this is, I mean, it has comedic moments.
Yeah.
But this is a very serious, very subdued role.
Yeah, it's not a comedic... I mean, I don't think it's a serious show.
No.
I think one of the differences, like, Legion has its funny moments, but this is much more like, I would call it a comedy. A dark comedy.
A dark comedy, yes, absolutely.
But I don't think his performance is comedic.
No, not at all.
And part of why it's a dark comedy, no one's performance is comedic. I mean, maybe some of the performances are comedic. Neither of the leads are playing for laughs.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? One of the things that makes a dark comedy, maybe, I'm thinking of this as I say it, so maybe it won't be true, but is that the lead is serious and the world is comedic, and that's unsettling for the prospective character.
Yeah.
When the world is weird and wrong, other things can be funny, but the main character doesn't find them funny, they find them disturbing.
Yeah.
And that's what makes it dark.
Yeah, I'd say so.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Something like that.
Emma Stone also fantastic in this. She is, I kept getting her confused. I thought this was Margot Robbie at first. She looks exactly like Margot Robbie.
No, she doesn't.
No. She's all blonde in this one.
With the straight blonde hair, there's some resemblance, I guess.
Anyway, she does fantastic as well. She is like, both of them they have to play so many roles on this show, and they play them all really well and really convincingly. And I imagine this is like a trippy show to film or to act in, because like you don't even know necessarily what you're doing at any given moment. But both of them do a great job of just going with it and fully embracing the character they're in at the moment.
Yeah, for sure. I think especially Emma Stone, actually.
Mm-hmm.
I think Jonah Hill surprised me by being as good as he was as the, like, outermost character.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think he showed as much versatility playing the different versions of that character as Emma Stone did.
Yeah, absolutely.
But still, it was, like, not what I expect from him.
Mm-hmm.
At all. I didn't recognize him. He has also, like, lost a lot of weight.
Yeah.
And is playing a very different kind of character than I've ever seen. And those two things together meant it was, like, halfway into the first episode when I was like, is that Jonah Hill?
Yeah, exactly. All right, so let's move into a spoilery discussion. So if you haven't seen this show, from now on, we're going to talk about the entire show beginning to end. So thank you for listening if you haven't watched the show, and see you later.
Yeah, come back when you've watched the show.
All right. So now here we are in the spoilery area. Do we have spoiler music? I'll know by you have just played it.
You just heard it. Didn't you hear it playing out of
Yes, absolutely.
the sky?
So I felt like this show, I didn't know if I liked it until I watched the very last episode.
Yeah.
And so I'm still not 100% sure what I think of it. We just finished it last night, and it's one of these shows where I didn't know what it was about until the last episode.
Yeah, I totally agree with that.
They just do this they go off, they do this, what do you call it, drug trial. They do this drug trial where they go to all these different realities, they do all these crazy things, and like in the real world, or whatever, the outermost world, there's this sad robot, or sad computer. Not robot.
Computer, yeah.
Gertie the sad computer. And all these layers are building up, and I'm just like, how does this end? If this ends with, like, everyone dead, then that was what it was about. But it ends with, like, kind of a happy ending.
Yeah. So, like, I felt exactly the same, that, like, one of the things that makes this such an interesting show to watch is, like you said, I didn't know where it was going. I didn't know what it was about. And it's not formulaic, so that having seen 8 out of the 10 episodes, I still don't know where it's going, in that I still don't know, like, what kind of show this is.
Mm-hmm.
I know it's a dark comedy, but is it how
dark is it?
How dark is it, and how comedy is it, and what are we building towards? So, like, having seen the end, then, do you have... Because, okay. Even before we get to the end, there's some answers to what it's about. Like, it's about trauma, and we see that both with Owen and Annie, but also James, the doctor, and Azumi, and Robert, who dies, also is, like, coping with trauma with his son, and, like, even minor characters, like, there's all this, it's all about trauma and how do you cope with trauma, and we see good ways and bad ways of coping with trauma, and every one of the, like, alternate realities, at first it is not clear, but eventually it becomes clear that those are all in their heads, and their ways of them coping with their trauma symbolically and metaphorically and whatever, right? Mm-hmm. So that's clear right away.
Yeah.
The computer has trauma, the characters, human characters, all have trauma, they're coping with it, some well and some badly. And so what I was expecting in the middle of it was that we'd get some kind of, like, statement on or perspective on trauma and its effect and how you cope with it by the end of the show. Do you think, like, did we?
I'm not sure we did. Or I feel like the whole premise of the drug trial was you can be cured without therapy.
Yeah.
And so in the end, it feels almost like they're cured. Or like they feel like they're cured. Well, Annie does.
Annie does, right? And it feels to me like what the ending, they
drive off together into the sunset.
And like, maybe that's a statement on like, we heal trauma together. They find each other.
Yes.
And like, why are we hearing their stories? There's other people in the drug trial, but we hear their stories because they end up connected to each other.
Mm-hmm.
And that's more healing than being isolated.
Yeah.
And for both of them, what ends up actually healing them isn't so much the drug trial as finding and connecting with each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. I think that is maybe the truth at the end of this show. Is that they find each other.
But then also, I think she ends the show much more clearly having been... I mean, the Dr. James says you're healed, not you're cured, but you're healed.
You're healed.
She seems much more clearly to have been healed of her trauma by the end of the show than he does.
Yeah.
Do you want to maybe go through each of their characters and what we think, what happens to them and how we understand it?
Yeah, well, let's start with Annie.
Okay.
So, I mean, we're given this premise of her, like, she's a mess when we first meet her.
Yeah.
She's just like this walking disaster who's broke and addicted to drugs, or addicted to a drug. And her father lives in some kind of a computerized box.
He does.
Her sister is away. We don't know her sister's dead at first.
No.
She's like, I'm going to visit her, which was interesting. I guess that meant her grave.
Maybe.
Or she's just in that much denial. And she steals all this money from her father.
Yeah.
So, yeah, she's just a mess. And we get to know her through this finally getting to know what happened to her sister. And then I felt like everything clicked into place.
Yeah.
As soon as you know that her sister is dead, like, you know there's some kind of trauma with her sister and that they're estranged and they fought and whatever. But as soon as you find out that her sister is dead, everything kind of clicks into place as to how she's going to be healed.
Her sister's dead and she thinks it's her fault, and maybe it is. Mm-hmm. And she, like, was bad to her sister before she died.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that Annie's trauma is much clearer, much more straightforward. Yes. It's like, she has her mom abandon them and was bad.
Yeah.
And that's kind of underlying it. But she also has like a moment of trauma that she's spending all her time coping with this one moment. And they're like, when we learn that the reason she's taking the drug is when she takes the drug, she relives the last minutes of her sister's life and the worst moments of her life. So why does she do it over and over is because she's with her sister.
Yeah, exactly.
It's very much more clear, I think, with her than with Owen. Like, she has to come to grips with her sister's death, and then she'll be able to move on. Like, what she needs is pretty clear.
Mm-hmm.
And in all the different versions, they call them reflections, we eventually learn.
Mm-hmm.
In all the different reflections, it's like we have a sense of what it is she's trying to do, and she slowly gets better at it, right? Like, she...
Mm-hmm.
In one of them, she goes back and like the whole story with the lemur that was like weird. But then when we find out that the woman she's giving the lemur to is the woman who's the mother of the driver who killed her sister, and she tries to talk her out of having kids.
Yeah, absolutely.
So she tries to fix her trauma by stopping it from happening.
Mm-hmm.
And then in like the spy story, she's like betrays Owen and is awful, and she tries to kind of symbolically prevent trauma by alienating people again.
Yes, exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
And then eventually...
And by trying to find an object that will make her live in a fantasy world.
Yes, that too. And then eventually she, in like the elf world...
Yeah.
makes peace with her sister, and her sister's like actually spends some time with her sister and remembers her and talks to her about all this stuff. And then in the very end, she like says goodbye to her.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what she needed. And we can see that she's been cycling around and getting closer and closer to being able to actually say goodbye to her sister. And in the elf world, like, she's unwilling to say goodbye to her sister, but it just hurts her, right?
Yeah.
And then by the end of the show, she's much more emotionally stable, and she can go and help Owen out, and she can go off on a new adventure, and she's, like, still a complicated person, but she doesn't have this huge trauma looming over her anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's the main thing. And she can confront her father and tell him what she needs.
Mm-hmm.
And find out that he's not as far gone as she thought he was when she gives this whole speech to the computer box, and he's not in it.
Yeah.
But he heard her from the window.
That he kind of, I mean, and what does that mean? He kind of heals from his trauma while she's gone.
Mm-hmm.
So her brokenness was part of what was breaking him.
And he thought she was gone.
Yeah.
He thought that was the end. The last one's gone. I'm on my own now.
Yeah. But then, like, Owen, it is less clear to me, this through line of exactly what he's been looking for the whole time and how to heal, how his trauma ends up being healed through this story.
Well, his main thing is that he can't stand up to his family. Like,
Yeah.
You have this overarching thing where from the very start, he's supposed to testify that he was with his brother when his brother did something awful.
Mm-hmm.
And he knows that he's going to lie, but he's committed to the family. And throughout, his stories often have to do with him being committed to a family and not committed to a family.
Right.
And so you have, like, the mobster family where he's betraying them by leaking information. You have, like, he runs off with the waitress and has, like, 7 kids or whatever and tries to abandon them.
Right.
By jumping out the window.
Because it's another family.
Because it's another family.
Leaving. And then in the story with the lemur is all about him being devoted to that family.
Yeah,
being devoted
exactly.
to Annie. And, like, he ends up taking the fall for her.
Mm-hmm.
Because he's taking the fall again for what someone else did.
Yeah, exactly.
And in the... And it feels too like... This is also... Like in the... Okay. What about the spy story? What is he after there? Because it turns out that he was testing security for the owner of the house, who is Gertie.
Right.
And he's like, it's about loyalty and him being, he wants to be loyal to Annie, but she betrays him and he's duped again.
Yeah.
And him being, his loyalties misplaced in that storyline.
Yeah, exactly.
Again. It also feels like there's a theme throughout all his stories of, like, he's not who he seems to be.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, the last one where he's, like, the Icelandic guy, but he's not really human, is kind of that sci-fi story.
Mm-hmm.
Or the one where he's in the gang story, like the waitress says to him, you're a lesson in not judging a book by its cover. Like, even beyond he's betraying his family, it's again and again, like, there's more to him than there seems to be.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And what is that?
I feel like that still has to do with his family because he's been pigeonholed by his family again and again and again.
Mm-hmm.
And they treat him terribly.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is all just his fantasy of escaping. And in that, and because he has that fantasy, he's able to stand up to them when he goes back to the real world and testifies against his brother in court.
Right.
And that doesn't turn out so well. But he's able to actually do it.
And then when Annie comes to get him, he's able to escape from the mental hospital or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
Because he has learned to escape.
Yes, exactly.
He has learned not to be trapped by misguided loyalties, but to actually pay attention to who cares about him.
Mm-hmm.
And he also gets cured of his delusions. He has, like, schizophrenic delusion of his brother of his fake brother that seems to be cured also. Because at the end of the Alien storyline, we hear, like, oh, I'm not going to be around anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And he isn't.
The other option for this whole thing is, in the end, we have Owen saying it's either option A or it's option B with Annie. And option A is that she doesn't exist at all. Mm-hmm. And option B is she does, and things end up going horribly. So, what if it's option A? Does Annie actually exist? Is that part of the mind trip of this show, is there's a potential there that Annie is Owen's delusion, just like his brother was?
I don't think so, though, because we see too much from her perspective.
There is, but his brother does actually exist. So he sees a secondary brother. So there's a real Annie.
Yeah.
But the Annie that Owen encounters at the end, is that still the real Annie?
I don't think so, because we see her go into the mental hospital from the outside.
Yeah.
Oh, come on. I don't think that there's really I don't suspect at all that the reality is in doubt. I think he's in doubt about reality, but we see too much from her perspective, and we see too much from the doctor's perspective. Like, There's a chance in my mind, like, I flitted past the option that, like, maybe the whole drug trial is a delusion.
Yeah.
But no, because we see James and Greta, and Gertie, or whatever her name is, Sally Field.
Yeah. Greta is the mom, Gertie is the computer.
We see them all, like, in things that Owen isn't involved in.
Yes, that's true.
So they're not his delusions.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I was going to mention about trauma. Azumi is, like, agoraphobic or something.
Yeah.
Because when she goes to get James, he's like, you came outside. And then at the end, you can drive? Like, he's not used to her being out in the world. She's obviously got some kind of issues, but she's worked through them.
Yeah. And Greta says, like, about Azumi that this whole trial you're hoping to heal yourself.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
But she doesn't take the pills.
No.
And she is if not healed, she's functional.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
She can drive. She can go outside when she needs to. She gives him a lift somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah, and to move on to more other side characters as well, Gertie, this computer, this emotional computer, is a big character in the show.
She is.
And it felt like, at the very end, her and Annie are on the elevator. Annie finally gets to tell her sister how she feels. Gertie is mourning and in so much pain, and it felt like she had a breakthrough, but then within the real world, they end up killing her. They end up completely shutting her down, when I felt like she was going to be okay.
I think definitely the show shows us her coping with her trauma and recovering from it, and, like, it makes logical sense. It makes character sense that they would turn her off because they don't know she's made this breakthrough.
Yeah.
But in terms of the story, like, that was kind of a blow.
Yeah, exactly.
And maybe that's the, like, not everything ends up happily ever after.
Mm-hmm.
Not everyone recovers from their trauma.
And in the end, she's a computer.
And
so she can be disabled.
Mm-hmm. There's, like, the relationships, like, the show ends with a lot of relationships being healed,
mm-hmm.
but, like, Robert and or James, not Robert, James and Greta, his mother, their relationship isn't healed by the end of the show.
No, definitely not.
And like he has a disorder where he like wants to have sex with holographic women.
Yeah, I'm not really sure what's up with that.
But like he says that's under control, but we like it wasn't when we meet him, and he just like asserts that it's true.
Yeah.
He wears a toupee for most of the show.
Yeah.
And there's like I think a sense there of what we see of him is false.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? That why do you start that character with having him be bald, having him be like have these in a holographic reproduction, have this big fake hair, and then he is balding, and then he puts on a toupee that he wears for then the rest of the show, and we have no acknowledgement of like his reality.
Yeah.
Again. I think that's a seed to us that like he is not healed or cured or better.
And within the drug trial lab, whatever, is not reality. It's like everything that exists in there has a falseness to it.
Yeah.
So I think we've talked about all of the characters, the show in general. Let's just talk about what we liked about it. Like, why did we keep watching this show? What moments did you find funny and good and interesting? What did you like about this show?
There were so, like, we started off this episode saying this, and I'm going to come back to it. Like, it was surprising. It was surprising throughout. I thought Emma Stone was so good. Every one of her incarnations was really good. And, like, when she shows up in the reality where, with the lemur, with, like, the great big perm 80s hair, and, like, that was hilarious.
Absolutely.
And, like, the lemur, just the fact of I need to get this lemur, and, like, it ends up having a bigger meaning, but that storyline was really funny, I thought.
Yep.
And, like, lots of the little details, like the doctors all sleep in these drawers in the drug trial place that are horrible.
They made me feel claustrophobic just looking at them. I was like, that is just horrifying. I would never ever be able to handle that. I love the storytelling and the visual storytelling in, like, there's repeat characters. And I feel like I definitely want to watch the show again at some point to get a sense of what actors repeat between the storylines and what does that mean for them.
Right. Yeah, so, like, there's the cop from the real world, or not the cop, the like, building security from the real world in one of the first scenes. There's a really funny scene when, like, Annie's walking past the building and she, like, digs through the garbage, and he comes out and is like, hey, don't dig through the garbage. And she's like, are you a cop? He's like, there's not much of a difference authority-wise. Which is a hilarious line. And then he shows up in her reflection with the lemur as animal control, saying the same line. And so the people who show up in the world of their minds are like people that they are taking from their experience and inserting them, right?
Yeah, it makes it very dreamlike.
Yeah.
That, you know, characters from your life play other characters in your dream.
Yeah.
And I like the way it plays with your mind that way. And so you're constantly figuring out who is who. And then, you know, I feel like I could watch it again a couple more times and get a deeper sense of why those characters are repeating and what that means to Annie and Owen.
What'd you think of the whole outermost reality concept of, like, you can pay for things with ad bucks and, like, just be advertised to forever, and then you can buy a newspaper or what have you?
Yeah. I mean, that felt like a very dystopian version of our world. Like I could really see that happening.
Right.
Not quite like that, but, like, this idea of we're almost there, we just do it electronically, is, well, I could pay to get this game on my phone, or I can just watch ads.
Yeah.
And half the time, I get an extra life if I watch an ad. Well, I'll just put my phone down for those 30 seconds, let the ad play, and then go back to it. And what if that was a real person that I could just kind of ignore who was talking to me?
Yeah.
It's
so good.
It's so well done.
It's so compelling as like a visual.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then the place that doesn't take ad bucks, and how he's like, he's basically like a Luddite in that world, and you can really see how that would be exactly people you'd run into, stores you'd go to, that in these days it's like stores that only take cash.
Yeah.
And you're like, ugh, you only take cash? I don't carry cash.
Because they're watching you and tracking your transactions.
Yeah.
And like, they're
not wrong.
They are.
Yeah.
They are watching you and tracking your transactions. That is definitely true.
Yeah, exactly. So like, it's a sad reality that I don't want to think about. Yay, let's not think about it. What's funny about it? Like, we keep saying it's a dark comedy. I'm trying to put my finger on exactly what's funny about it.
I was like, off mic, I was like, we should talk about, the parts that we thought were really funny. And then you were like, what parts did you like, Paul? And I was like, I can't think of a moment that was funny. But like, for example, when they are hunting for the lost chapter of Don Quixote, that in itself is funny. That is a chapter that Cervantes wrote that was so compelling that anyone who reads it is going to be in a fantasy forever.
Yeah.
Comatose. And they play it very straight and serious.
Mm-hmm.
And then he unlocks the safe and he brings out this tiny little book. I'm like, why is it so small? People were a lot smaller back then.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good moment and a weird moment.
And then tiny book comes up again later.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And that's
Owen reads his confession when he's the Icelandic guy off of like teeny tiny pages.
That's another moment of just straight up comedy, by the way, when he's the Icelandic guy and he starts by telling his life story. And he's like, my father was German and my mother was Finnish by way of France. And that's why my accent sounds so weird. My unique accent. There's a great, so that Jonah Hill doesn't have to worry about doing an authentic Icelandic accent.
Yeah, exactly.
So there are the moments of just outright comedy.
Yeah, it's absurdity. A lot of what the comedy is so absurd that it's comedic, and then so over the top. Like you have the whole lemur story with the fur guys and how ridiculous they are.
Yeah,
is funny, and
they have the code to the door, written on a Post-it note stuck above the code.
Yes.
And it's 1, 2, 3, 4.
Yeah.
And then later when she's they've changed the code and she has to talk to Owen, she's like, what do you say when you count in to start dancing? 5, 6, 7, 8. Yeah, and that's the code.
Yeah.
Because they dance. Those are all funny.
Mm-hmm.
All these things though are funnier when they happen.
Yes.
Because it's this deadpan, surreal, you don't know when something bizarre and absurd is going to happen and it takes you off guard.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
It's a little like Fargo in that way.
It is.
The dark humorness of it reminds me a bit of Fargo.
I think it plays into the comedy a little heavier than Fargo does.
Mm-hmm.
But it does. It is. Fargo definitely is funny.
Yep.
So, I feel like I have more to say about Maniac, but it's not coming to me. Do you have anything else you particularly want to say or ask about this show?
I think I just want to say that, it's good. It's, it's no Legion, to be honest. I'm not going to pretend like it is. It's no Fargo. But it's an interesting show, compelling show. I would love to hear people's thoughts on it. If any of you guys out there have watched it and have some thoughts and have some, why does it remind us of Legion? It just does, in a way. We've kind of tried to put our finger on it, but there's just something about it. So, yeah, let us know if you want to have more of a chat. You could do that on Twitter at ClockworksCast. If you want to be really spoilery, maybe send us just a direct message in Twitter, or you can send us an email, clockworkscast@gmail.com. These in-between episodes, between seasons, are all because we are supported on Patreon.
Yep.
So if you like these in-between things and extra stuff, you can contribute to that by going to patreon.com/clockworkscast, where you can give as little as $1 and as much as you want to just help us out with our costs and make it us able to record this podcast and our other podcast at the same time.
Absolutely.
No waiting. If you have ideas for future episodes we could do in between in the off season of Legion, let us know.
Yeah,
in all those places I just listed.
We'll definitely take requests. Well, we'll consider requests.
So we hope to hear from you guys. I've been Jan Moffat.
I've been Paul Moffat. Goodbye. Hello. Welcome to Podcast, a Legion Clockworks. Hello. Welcome to Legion. No, still wrong.
Do you want me to do it?
I take one more crack at it. I've run through two of the possibilities.